Good afternoon. My name is Garrett Albright, and I'll be presenting my case study on Hurricane Harvey, Texas, 2017. My presentation objectives will be to provide an overview of the events leading up to the disaster, go over the scope of the event, groups affected, casualties and injuries, financial losses, and long-term effects. I want to discuss the actions of relevant stakeholders, being residents, first responders, and government. We're going to discuss the actions of emergency management, specifically the City of Pearland, the lack of their action, the negative actions, and the positive action. Lastly, we'll reconvene on the current conditions of the affected area. The timeline before the storm consisted of August 18th through the 26th. On the 18th, the National Weather Service issued a forecast for Tropical Storm Harvey, which really didn't give us any immediate threat to Texas. But with any type of system in the Gulf, kind of keep an eye on it. On the 22nd, a few days later, the National Weather Service advised that Harvey had weakened to a tropical disturbance over the Yucatan. We thought it might be a 9% chance of development for Harvey. The NHC did. Routes predicted that it would travel to the lower to middle Texas coast. So again, not too much of a threat for East Texas. The next day, the National Weather Service stated that Harvey was likely to strengthen back to a tropical storm or even a hurricane as it traveled along to the Texas coast. Forecasters kind of commented that it was a slow-moving storm cell, which would bring a lot of heavy rainfall. The next day, National Weather Service advised that Harvey will become a strong Category 3, making landfall Friday night, the 25th, on the middle Gulf Coast, Texas. Forecasters still only predicted 15 to 30 inches of rain, which is significant, but it did not come to close to what we did have. This was all for coastal counties. On this day as well, Mayor Reed of Pearland signed the disaster declaration. On August 25th, the National Weather Service advised that after landfall, Harvey is likely to stall, causing heavy flooded and isolated areas, and those isolated areas could receive as much as 40 inches. On the 26th, NWS advised that Tropical Storm Harvey is moving back towards Matagorda Bay and would slowly move north inland over the next 5 days. Late Saturday evening is when the storm hit Pearland. And over that morning over the next few hours into early Sunday, Pearland experienced a large deluge of rainwater that totaled to be 25 to 30 inches and received another 20 inches throughout the time to Tuesday. The EOC was not activated until 11 p.m. Saturday, with the rain beginning about 8:30. After Harvey, it caused a lot of damage to the city of Pearland. There were over 1,700 homes that flooded, 50 commercial properties that flooded. Estimated that was more than $35 million in residential damage. There were over 400 water rescues performed. Governor Abbott declared that the storm possibly cost $150 billion in statewide damage. The city of Pearland experienced two major failures in the wastewater treatment plants and flood control that uses pumps to move water across the flood drainage ditches and canals. This damage ended up costing the city and taxpayers over $1.5 million. This storm did tax the city services to a breaking point. The continued damage assessment was that estimated 50,000 cubic yards of storm debris was removed from the city of Pearland, which is an astronomical amount. Several municipal buildings incurred damage from rain and floodwaters. This included 2 fire stations, City Hall, and multiple other facility buildings. 6 city-owned vehicles were totaled due to flooding. The early estimate that our finance department has provided was that we're at a loss of greater than $100 million in damages. This map highlights the hot areas, or it's called a heat map, that assess the property damage for the city of Pearland. The city of Pearland is L-shaped on its side, with left and right being east and west respectively, north being towards the beltway up there on the map. You can see that the red areas were heavy flood damage and yellow being moderate. You can see that there was various pockets inside the city that had very severe flood damage, and these are all neighborhoods and subdivisions that experienced large amounts of property loss and damage. And then we also had several homes that were off the beaten path, if you will, that also needed help or assistance and that received damages from Harvey. We were very fortunate that we had no casualties due to the storm. We did have some minor injuries from civilians attempting to perform rescues, and they were treated on scene. Dialysis patients became a priority because of the time that we were isolated from other areas and that roadways were impassable by private vehicles. We were basically cut off from surrounding cities and other hospitals. Locally, we have two, and those hospitals stepped up to the plate and were able to provide those citizens with the necessary treatments and procedures that they were needing to maintain their health. City workers in many departments worked 12 or even 24-hour shifts in an attempt to provide those services. This showed to be very taxing on them, especially the first 72 hours of the storm when rain continued. In the middle of water rescues and everything like that, and other employees were not able to come in immediately due to weather and flooding in other areas. Those with significant needs that we identified was nursing home patients and bedridden. So nursing homes that started to have some flooding were kind of behind the eight ball due to preliminary reports from weather forecasters and EOC saying that it would be a minor flood event. Well, then when it turned significant, those nursing homes hadn't prepared for evacuation. So obviously those areas were monitored very closely. Fortunately, we had no nursing homes that had to be evacuated. We were able to continue to keep storm waters at bay in those areas. We did have many bedridden patients that, due to power loss in their area or impending floodwaters, were transported by EMS out of the area and were transported via high water vehicles to a local shelter or even to Bell County, where we had our in-place shelter and interlocal agreement with them. As we talked about Bell County, most of our residents that were brought in to our shelter, it was just an immediate shelter. They were transported by bus and through high water vehicles to a bus location and chartered to Bell County, where they were housed and remained for 5 to 6 days. As I mentioned earlier, the actions or lack thereof of some of our government departments was significant in how the incident was handled. There was no increase in staffing for many departments until after the initial landfall. Again, with the forecasts that were given, a lot of administrators didn't see the need to hold people over or to, well, it's honestly expensive to keep a lot of people on staff, so they didn't want to make that commitment just yet and cry wolf. However, we found out that that was a very bad deal and the storm did surprise us, and there was only normal crews in place to be able to handle emergencies, and that includes PD and fire. EOC did not open until after the first deluge, so meanwhile 25-30 inches, we had floodwaters that were impending on homes that were already getting into people's homes. We had water rescues, and we had 3 engine companies and 2 ladders and PD out doing manual water rescues without proper equipment because it could not be given to them. We didn't have the staffing to operate that extra equipment and the few boats that we did have. We were, like I said earlier, we provided over 400 water rescues. That's not including water evacuations that were not life threats or injury threats. The 400 water rescues were people that were in harm's way. We were able to provide medical teams for residents with dialysis needs. So those that could not be moved or were fine in their home but just couldn't because of waterways, we were able to assist medical teams and professionals to get to their home to provide those dialysis. More than 400 employees ended up showing up for work after the rain stopped on Tuesday and continued to stay and came together and pulled strings and did whatever they could to keep facilities running. This included the wastewater plants that received damage. They did continue to run and produce significant output. However, they were near catastrophic failure. If those employees had not been able to come to work, it could have cost the taxpayers a lot more. Like I said, the infrastructure almost failed. However, because employees kept coming in and taking care of business, a lot of things kept maintained and stayed afloat, if you will. The residents' actions were amazing. Churches really came together and worked together flawlessly, provided shelters within their buildings and assistance to many people. Many residents deployed personal boats to assist with rescues during the water rescue period. We had several people come and brought boats to the fire station. Was like, here, use my boat. So we were very thankful for that because the boats that we did have in the fire department had been neglected, had not been maintained. We did use those, but we didn't have oars. We had to push them manually with PFDs on. So it was quite a stretch of what we should be doing. A lot of residents helped with needs at municipal shelters. If they were able-bodied, they did whatever they could. They provided activities for children, as you see. They helped people inside the shelter, helped take record keeping, provided equipment, whatever they could do. Able residents in their neighborhoods checked on those high-risk residents, those that were bedridden or home-ridden, didn't have vehicles. Our residents really pulled together and took care of each other and their neighbors. They also provided great support for us. I know, speaking from the fire department, I was at work stuck for 6 days. And they come up after the rain stopped and brought food because we didn't have any grocery stores open. They brought food for us to cook. They brought meals, snacks, new socks, underwear. I mean, they thought of everything, and we were very, very spoiled, and we were very thankful for them. The lessons that we learned were the negatives, or lack of initial city staffing, putting city behind the ball throughout the storm, lack of water rescue equipment. We only had 2 boats that were inoperable, lack of an instant action plan that wasn't put out until 36 hours into the storm, no protocol or citywide protocol for a large event or disaster like this, lack of ICS training for many of the city staff, facilities staff, facilities for staff to rest when they're not assigned to an assignment. We had nowhere for them to have bedding or to lay down or take a break on their 12-hour or 24-hour shifts. And we had a lot of communication issues between departments. Positives. It was a large event that the city continued to provide, came together, and overcame the odds. A dedicated staff of public servants. Willingness to ask for assistance when other governments were willing to help. Our leaders, our representatives actually took that help and was very thankful for it. Our city was great at record keeping and documentation. I mean, I would think down to the last penny that got spent, they had it accounted for. Stayed out and about with the residents after the storm water started coming down. We were out checking on people, doing anything we could to help our citizens and our residents. The communications with residents was above par. We had 2 people that continued to staff on social media and answer questions. Since Harvey, the rainwater has receded and we're doing great. Training has been implemented and on schedule for those that need it. Equipment is being purchased or is being researched to provide better services in case of a similar event. The city is looking at buying into some properties, private properties, to increase the flood control if the citizens are willing. Infrastructure repairs have been complete and everything's back to normal operations. We strengthen our relationships with nearby ISDs and other local governments, and reliability residents is at an all-time high.